Hi, Manuel. How's it going?
Good Jesus, how about you?
Well, it's interesting to notice that there's a topic which has been generating a lot of discussion lately. It revolves around extraterrestrials and the potential presence of these mysterious entities that might be living among us. There's truly a lot to discuss on this subject. What are your thoughts about it?
Well, you and I, as you know, the expert on this subject is one of your great specialization. I think that extraterrestrials, I'm not sure if they are truly extraterrestrials or if they have always been present with us. They might be different races that were once here or have developed here and now exist in a parallel universe where they intermingle with us. So what we need to define, and nobody has yet been able to define, is whether they really originate from other planets or if they have always been here alongside us.
Notice one thing that has caught my attention for years, as you know. In my production area, I've had the chance to meet numerous individuals who claim to be contactees and researchers. This experience has allowed me to engage directly with their personal stories. I can share with you that to delve deeper into this topic, perhaps the most intriguing aspect of all of this involves understanding what defines a contactee and what the UFO phenomenon truly is and what it is not. In all this, I would ask you, when do you remember the first time you heard about UFOs?
Well, ever since he was a child. Back in the 60s, there was a very well-known case in Spain, and it happened specifically in Madrid, a case that is quite well known and has been the subject of study for a long time. The phenomenon started with the supposed sighting of a UFO, which was actually photographed. This occurred in the Aluche area of Madrid. Numerous investigations were conducted regarding this case. I recall that the newspapers did not cover it extensively, but some periodicals from that era, such as one named El Caso, which was fond of sensational stories that drew a lot of interest, followed it closely. It was said that it was a fraud, that the photos they had taken, well, there were investigators who said that they were prepared. The supposed UFO was hanging from some threads, and the Guardia Civil in subsequent investigation said that there was not that kind of pendant that was said that thread which had it, but simply was problems of the photo itself, the quality and the time it took. They couldn't define the truth or the falsehood of that case. We're discussing the Spanish Guardia Civil, the forensic department, all very serious individuals. These are serious people who will be swayed by fantasy, yet they couldn't determine if the phenomenon was real. I recall that was when my interest began, around age 8.
Notice that I have conducted a thorough investigation to start forming an understanding of how this phenomenon unfolds and from what point in time, as you mentioned right now, that the authorities are often present in many instances where such phenomena are reported. In these cases, it is not always clear whether what one is observing is a meteorological phenomenon, an airplane sighting, or perhaps something that might be classified as military technology, or what exactly all of this is. Here's the interesting part. I have my notes and can see much of this is conveyed through the book reports. When this begins to be done, I don't know if you recall, it was at the end of the 19th century and the start of the 20th century. The book, The War of the Worlds, was later adapted by Orson Welles into a radio program. This broadcast caused panic in a region of the United States, particularly in the northern area around New York, where people believed Earth was being invaded. This event possibly sparked the idea of extraterrestrial presence, bringing forth a more defined vision. Not friendly. The question that arises in all of this is, what exactly is the UFO phenomenon? Given that it is said to be an unidentified flying object, it would take us back to the era when humanity, with the help of the Wright brothers, began developing the technology necessary to enable flight, and we observe airplanes as we know them. However, what occurs when a type of technology emerges that begins to defy the laws of physics? We start to see flying objects that at certain moments do not possess that kind of characteristics similar to airplanes. Then I would often ask myself in many of these situations, at what point does the space age truly begin, as it is already attempting to conquer the space where terrestrial technology is already in use? When does it become a technology that is not of this earth and could potentially originate from other places, possibly other dimensions? There are some who assert that they come from other worlds. And that's where we're going to get to the point of what is. Because at what point do we consider the UFO phenomenon to be connected with the extraterrestrial phenomenon? They are essentially the same. These are spacecraft operated by entities originating from other dimensions. These beings need a special vehicle to interact with us within our atmosphere and in accordance with our laws of physics to fully grasp why they are called unidentified flying objects. Actually, the interesting aspect is that when all these kinds of investigations started to come out, they began to categorize them. So it is no longer that they are simply unidentified flying objects, but they have now become identified flying objects. This is because they have already classified a range of different types of objects. These can include lights, plasmas, or even the well-known flying object. The flying saucer that Kenneth Arnold photographed in 1947 at Mount Rainier, located in the state of Washington, on Jackie's Reservation, and in that particular case, it starts to become a significant social phenomenon as it begins to trigger all these events. However, there are also accounts from the Second World War discussing the well-known Foo Fighters. These are those types of mysterious spheres that pilots observed and reported. They are lights that interacted during the World War. It was uncertain whether it was German technology or perhaps from whom. That is, whether it was from the Allies themselves, it was entirely known. And quite curiously enough, we find that there are currently various reports that are coming out from declassified photographs where they discuss Hitler's bell and about what that particular technology possessed, where you can clearly see precisely how they were experimenting with. Flying saucers that could levitate and not necessarily fly like an airplane without the need for a turbine, but the ability to gravitate. This is perhaps where Nikola Tesla comes into play. With all the technology he introduced at the start of the 19th century, he managed to break many rules, which, interestingly enough, were seized by various governments, beginning with the US government, and he was already using that technology. So let's begin there. Manuel.
Well, I understand it clearly. When you mentioned World War II, Hitler and the potential flying saucers, look, I believe the UFO phenomenon based on research begins during the Second World War. I think these beings, whether from another planet or already here, might exist in a parallel universe to ours. Even we haven't discovered parallel universes yet, they might be in another parallel universe, like a radio on a different frequency. They're on a different frequency than us. The issue that began in 1944 or 45, when this phenomenon started, is the atomic bomb's creation. That was the main issue. I think the people infiltrated among us realize the serious damage it may pose to mankind, not necessarily. To the people of, I believe, that in this part of the earth, but in a parallel universe, the power of that atomic explosion could affect their parallel universe and ours. That's when we really start having a much deeper experience with these beings. We have the famous Roswell case from 1947 to 48. And it's the, I think, most famous incident where supposedly a craft was shot down. They were shot down in New Mexico's desert by US authorities. And among them are various extraterrestrials, most as described by the sources of that time. Later were what we call the grays. Their platinum-like form. So there are many theories in relation to that. But what is clear is that after this type of incident, like this one, like the one in White Sun, also in New Mexico, our technology increases geometrically, not arithmetically. As a result of having access to these contacts, it is when those beings that inhabit the earth, the scientists, begin a process of discoveries and technological development never seen before. And it is, many scholars tell you, that it is precisely because of the advanced technology that they find in these ships that they begin to apply it to our technology. It is a theory. For me, it has quite a glimpse of reality, because the scientific advance that we have had in the last 4 years is comparable to what we have more than doubled or tripled in the entire history of mankind that we know of. So this could be the turning point. I don't know what you think about that.
No, curiously, when you talk about the atomic bomb, few people know that the first nuclear explosion in the history of mankind was not in Hiroshima or Nagasaki, but in Los Alamos in the United States. And it is precisely because of that fact that there exists the region that is quite well known today among enthusiasts and researchers who are deeply passionate about the phenomenon of ufology is the famous Area 51. This is a region. Let's describe it as, in quotation marks, military and research oriented. And it is located exactly in the area between the four corners known as the states of Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. It is precisely there, in that particular area, where these significant events have been discovered, much like the case of Roswell. For me, personally, I would definitely not leave aside the part about how interesting it is when Second World War comes to an end. When the Allies arrive in Germany, they bring with them von Braun, who is considered the father of the Allies in Germany, and he is indeed the father of von Braun, of the advanced rocket technology, which is precisely what they were experimenting with, using the B-2, which was the device intended to bomb England. And it turns out that when he is brought over here, he is the individual who starts to develop all the groundbreaking technology that eventually evolves into aerospace technology. This is where he lays the foundation for what we recognize today as NASA and the ambitious endeavor to send humans to the moon. Therefore, I think that there are two significant elements that come together: the innovative technology of Nikola Tesla and the pioneering technology of von Braun. Now, here's the question we need to consider. Why is the Roswell case often mentioned? Initially, why was it described as a weather balloon incident? And there were numerous versions, some quite strange, but the interesting thing is that this is where the military starts to show up. At this point, all sorts of evidence begin to be seized, and various facts supporting a version of something possible are presented. Let's assume that there are two aspects involved here. One being the military part, which involves technology that's still in development, and the other being the presence of aliens. But initial reports at the alien level, the question isn't just from 1947. There are many reports throughout human history. That's where classifying this phenomenon begins, as it's not the first time aliens have been seen. There were so many sightings that the Blue Book Project was created, and even a TV series was produced in the 1970s, where they started searching for everyone who had those reports. This is when a character named Alan Hynek comes into the picture. He is the one who starts to categorize the phenomenon. He begins to classify it, and this is where the first types of encounters are defined. For instance, when someone sees a light or they observe an object or even a saucer, this is how the term unidentified flying object or UFO originated. I don't know what it is. What I do know is that it is not an airplane. Number two, there's starting to be a little bit of interaction already with the ships or supposed ships. They are already called ships with the environment, and it is where they leave a footprint, a trace, and perhaps the best known is the so-called crop circles or the agrograms that are there in England, which are the most famous, although there are reports from the 15th century or other times where you see that there have been some marks of some things that were not known and were attributed. It was not known what they were, and they were attributed that it was the devil. Curiously, then comes a third type of contact that he categorizes is known as the Klaus encounter, originating from the Zane. This concept gained significant fame, especially through the series and the Steven Spielberg film Close Encounters of the Third Kind. In that movie, what exactly constitutes a close encounter of the third kind? Well, the most curious thing is that many people who have not seen that movie have seen the movie, but they do not know the most important message that is there, that this close encounter is made precisely through the sound when they begin to see that melody, where they start in the trip they make to India, where a group of Hindus meet and begin to mantralize, and the ships are the ones that leave that message. When they visit the mountain in Wyoming, where the military is, an investigation unfolds. A researcher starts having dreams, reports, and visions. Interestingly, this is where science fiction begins to blend in with reports and accounts from people claiming experiences. This is where everything starts to mix. For me, the intriguing part is where reality and fiction blur. And within all of that, there is an awful lot that can be fantasy, can be myth, can be urban myth, what people say they saw and their personal experiences. But the most important key within all this is that there is evidence of extraordinary things that have no explanation of something that is technology, terrestrial. For me, it has to do a lot. Well, within this classification that you have made, Alan Hynek already enters. Close encounters of the fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh type. The contact directly from the alien knows where it originates, and you sent me the report stating that 7 races are classified as interacting with us. However, up to 60 races or more have been identified, and they come from various places, such as different planets, constellations, other dimensions, or even intraterrestrial origins or multi-universes, which is the most fascinating aspect of all this. The question is, where does this frontier of fiction begin and where does it end? And that is where the literary part comes in, as for example, in your book 22, The War of the Gods, where it is said that these aliens could have been the angels, could have been the gods of antiquity in Egypt, in Sumer, in the Mesoamerican world, in the world of Quetzalcoatl, of Viracocha, in the Peruvian part. Who are those gods? What did you discover in your literary journey, Manuel?
In my literary explorations, I found those beings, gods, or those species have existed throughout history. We see it even in the Bible, which explains certain phenomena. When I told you I was analyzing the 7 most known kinds about aliens, as the first we encounter are reptilians. They are a warrior race, standing 4 meters tall, with psychic abilities. That instantly I related to what Genesis says about the fall of the angels, who had relations with human women and gave rise to the class of the Titans or giants. Well, these people of ethers, are those giants. What happens that if we are talking about 500, 4 years ago, of course the people of that time saw that as gods, but it could well be a race. Of the reptilians, well, that was something already present. And well, we are not going to delve into the world of the reptilian because it is quite complex, especially if we consider the writings of David Icke, because it is perhaps, let's say, extraterrestrials that roam the earth, that that mixed with us and are the most controversial. Because remember, according to David Icke, well, today all the world rulers that have existed and currently exist come from the reptilians. So it is an extraterrestrial, or as I say, that arose here, but they are the ones who dominate the world and those who enter all circles of power. It has been a very controversial hypothesis, but there it is. There it is. He considers that all the great, the rulers of the world, good and bad, all come in origin from this species or race or extraterrestrial group, but they dominate all areas of humanity. And when there are wars or confrontations, it is a fight between them, a fight between gods.
Here comes David Icke, who is quite a character known for igniting social networks with what is nowadays referred to as conspiracy theories. In this realm, this kind of information reaches a point where, well, how do we describe these reptilian beings that are said to be hybridized among us? I would like to ask you in this context, do you consider this to be real, or perhaps fantasy, or maybe a blend of both?
I'd say it's a mix of both. There's been hybridization. For sapiens, humans, however you define it, no doubt for me, there is absolutely no doubt, because there is simply no way. Despite the fact that all biologists and all scientists discuss evolution, no one has ever been able to conclusively prove the transition from monkey to man. So far, no one has proven it. That missing link isn't there. That's where hybridization plays a role. In whatever existed, that's where I believe hybridization comes in. These beings, as discussed in the Astronaut God chapter, manipulate our DNA and make us evolve. That takes hundreds of thousands of years, yet here we are. I believe several races were involved, often due to being too few and needing to continue. The best way to do so was hybridization, mixing with beings on Earth and like the sapiens. This is why evolution was so rapid. Because if you talk about a period that Homo sapiens is said to begin as 300 dawns, between 300 and 100 dawns, that is. Really 240 years ago, when we talk about these types of periods, when Earth is millions of years old, nothing, a very short time, maybe long for us, but short. So for me, it really makes a lot of sense. The concept of hybridization, various races or species that, as I mentioned to you, don't necessarily originate from another planet. Yes, they can indeed come from another planet, but it's also possible they have been here just like we are here. Because we would need to revisit the very beginnings of the world, whether you lean towards the creationist perspective or the evolutionist perspective, where we find ourselves here by mere chance. By pure chance, the conditions were right, the chance for life to emerge. So, beginning from these civilizations or beings, as you choose to call them, I find it very plausible that they were here. Why not? Or even perhaps they came from another planet, because we are discussing unknown technologies from these beings. They might be far more advanced and arrived on Earth as explorers, stayed, and then needed to hybridize to perpetuate themselves. You understand me? But those are just various theories. The main point is that I believe there is substantial evidence suggesting that these people, or perhaps these entities or species, are here living among us. What many people are curious about is whether they are here to assist us, to take advantage of us, or perhaps exploring potential of gaining control over the earth in future. These are the questions that people are asking, and they are indeed very challenging to answer.
Well, however, here we are delving into rather complex issues, because do you remember that we mentioned it the other day? At what level does this entire question of hybridization potentially exist in human beings? We were discussing the RH factor. There are certain writers and individuals who believe that our DNA, specifically our blood type, plays a significant role in making each of us unique. When discussing human beings, we often assume we are identical, sharing the same traits and characteristics. However, these thinkers argue that there are indeed elements such as our genetic makeup that set us apart and differentiate us from one another, highlighting our distinctiveness. But where did the idea originate that the rhodium factor is the element, serving as the proof, the fingerprint of their presence in our DNA?
Well, there's been quite a number of studies on that topic. Just the other day, we had a conversation about a book titled Black Line of the Gods, Black Line of the God, in which the author thoroughly explains. When these people still mention the Nibiru folks, as they discuss the ancients mixed with altering our DNA. In some cases, all those people who have their RH factor modified change to or 0. So you find a large part of this world population that have 0, -0. Do you find a large amount? Not a large number, because the 0 factor only affects 15% of the population. The remaining population has either A or B. Only affects 15% of the population that is very centralized in what is the Spanish Basque country. And then French Basque country, that is supposed to have come by a modification of the Cro-Magnons, that is a mutation that was with the Mutanons, are also in South Africa, which indicates the theories of the astronaut gods who came to look for gold. So it is not a factor rho, gold, or 0, whatever you want to call it, or -0, that is, spread all over the world. Well, it can indeed be spread if people emigrate and so forth, but it remains centralized in certain specific areas. I've even heard some people mention that this factor in the Spanish Basque country and French Basque region is due to the language they speak. It's a language that is truly incomprehensible, meaning we do not know its origins or where it comes from. Some say it comes from somewhere, but we lack concrete origins. This is because all the other languages we are familiar with have a known origin or are based on other languages. But this particular language does not have such a traceable origin. So it is meant to be a highly phonetic language, which is exactly what they discovered from listening to the language these extraterrestrials were speaking. I mean, and in a way it could make sense, but what is clear is that there is a difference. If the difference is due to the RH factor, it might be, but it's just another aspect. Consider the case of reptilians or Davis among all these conspiracy theories. What is abundantly clear is that in the beginning, when you travel to Europe, you would see that all the royal families were intermingling. All of them were intermarrying with each other, forming these significant power alliances. Why did these power alliances form? Why did they start creating them in such a manner? Because you see, the primitive tribes did not operate that way. Such alliances did not exist. However, by the time of the Middle Ages, this practice begins to become quite widespread and very common, where you see there are theories suggesting that all these reptilian beings start forming alliances that are meant to last indefinitely for perpetuity. It's true. It's a lie. I don't know.
But notice, interestingly enough, that aside from the actual role of the monarchies in Europe, let's return to the Hebrew era of Moses, where he is considered one of the prominent contactees and where Yahweh is mentioned as an entity that appears. In fact, Salvador Freixedo authored a book titled Israel, People, Contact. It is often said that from the time when what we refer to as God reveals himself to them, liberates them from Egypt, and guides them through the desert for a period of 40 years. So these 40 years are also symbolic, one might say. There's a lineage where the Jew doesn't mix, making consanguineous relations crucial, found worldwide. And interestingly enough, I noticed that in Mexico, I stumbled upon something that I found to be absolutely fascinating. It is quite similar to the Jewish part of history. The Huicoles, who are indigenous people from a specific region, managed to survive all the challenges of the conquest and everything that came with it. They have maintained their race and traditions at a remarkable level, more so than many others. Even though they face some complications due to societal issues like alcoholism and related matters, among themselves, it is crucial not to intermingle because of their inbreeding concerns. They often discuss the significance of maintaining the purity of their bloodline, and they also have certain regions, that is where we would talk about another very important aspect of contactism, that just as we are talking about the different races, there are places of contact, just as the Holy Land is a place of contact. Just as in Egypt, different cities were found and built in relation to points of contact, we see places where there are energetic portals, where, for example, in Peru, Sixto Paz and Ricardo Gonzalez, who are members of the Ramo group, discuss these locations where the Sendras appear. These are the energetic portals that J.J. Benitez popularized in his book, which revealed all about humanity. This is when the UFO phenomenon emerged at a literary level, though it was grounded in certain contactism facts. And as I was telling you, the Huicoles have this very intriguing aspect regarding the blood. So today we find ourselves in a situation where what you are mentioning about the monarchies is relevant. Well, there is talk that the reptilians are currently the race that is in vogue, and within the conspiracy realm, well, some people even claim that Queen Elizabeth and many other individuals who are famous or hold significant importance are actually directing the world, the economy, and all those aspects, well, or even the destinies of humanity, because they are considered to be part of those races. We also discussed the Greys, noting that an important aspect of close encounters, the fourth kind, is chip implantation, where they start to step in and kidnap on a certain level. There's a well-known incident from the 60s where a book was written about a couple traveling to the northern United States. They experience memory loss, and eventually they consult with someone who conducts a regression on them, a researcher, and during the hypnosis session, they uncovered that the event actually happened. The researcher starts to realize that it's more genuine than he initially imagined it could be. Interestingly, this researcher later discovers more cases and establishes a university chair in the northern US to study them. It's found that some people have experienced this in a real, not imaginary way. This leads to the topic of aliens or entities initiating contact. It is not just a casual vision anymore, where you simply find them and become a spectator of a phenomenon, observing as the object passes by. It's no longer about discovering a place and seeing a mark, wondering if something happened here or not. Now, it's the other experience where you interact and say, well, we encountered beings. Space, similar to the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, but now it's a more specific concern. It's a fascinating phenomenon because it's been discovered that these chips implanted in the body. They send and emit signals, and there are some questions of mixtures between technology and biological questions where we do not know exactly what they call, who's creating this information and why. There are those who say that it is to track us, it is to have a contact of certain control, but well, there come phenomena where, well, there is the other case of the famous. That came to give a boom to all this phenomenon, which is the case of Willy Meyer, the Swiss who did this. The presentation of these images where the ships appear, the ships, and he can record them, and they look for him. And that is where he exists. Maybe for me is where a phenomenon called the contactee syndrome comes in. Someone who is chosen, someone who is a spokesperson, someone who is a person who comes to interact with these beings in a programmed way, programmed close encounters, and that is where we come in all of these various races that we're discussing, which you mentioned to me earlier. You actually have the list of them there with you.
Yes, look, we started with the reptilians, the second group, which is really the most significant at a popular level, because when you discuss contactees, it's the one most people have seen. Like in the Spielberg movie about Close Encounters, well, these are the characters known as the Greys. The Greys are known to be thin, have a large head, and almond-shaped eyes, which is what we call the classic alien for encounters. And how do people describe them? Well, they describe them as short as 50 centimeters. So we could apply to the famous legends about the gnomes, the goblins, when people saw them running. But the normal size that they describe is between 90 centimeters and 1 feet, is the size that they describe of the Greys. I have even read that they could reach 150, but it is normally between 90 centimeters and 120 centimeters. These are regarded like the villains in the movie. All those who tell you, those that terrify people, and indeed they are the ones that are often discussed when individuals have been contacted and taken aboard their ships. These encounters typically involve sightings of small beings conducting experiments on them, as described through regressions. This is how people report their experiences. In the well-known incident that we mentioned earlier in New Mexico, when they made this famous, we don't know if it was true or false, the autopsy of an alien. The autopsy they perform is of a Grey. It is said that this movie, that this documentary was made, that it was a farce, that it was totally invented, but there are still many people who believe that it is true. So this type of characters are very controversial because people angels aren't defined as good but are dangerous, like reptilians. The next class I sent you is more interesting to me. Is the Pleiadians. The Pleiadians, who are the same image as us, are humans as more evolved and much higher than us. Then I apply this to the Bible. To the angels, these were, well, when you define an angel, they are usually defined as such: tall, blonde, with long hair. These are the Pleiadians. The other kind, the only aliens mentioned are the Lyrians. They claim to be in constant conflict with the reptilians and describe them as beings or extraterrestrial that embody the feminine aspect of humanity, just like when you see a trillion image. It's a fierce image. Imagine seeing someone like that with such a face at 4 meters tall, where you might either run or have a heart attack if you freeze. But the aliens are portrayed more as women, very beautiful women, who truly appear in times of need. I relate it to theory and literature, specifically what we refer to as fairies. When one of those delightful fairies appears, I think that perhaps some writers or individuals have had this kind of experience, and today they have read about it. I apply this so-called extraterrestrial race to what we know as fairies. Now, moving on to the next race, we have the Arcturians. The first person to speak about them was Edgar Cayce. Edgar Cayce was the pioneer in discussing the Arcturians, and before him, there was nothing known.
Provide more details to clarify who Edgar Cayce was, a well-known figure, recognized as the most renowned psychic of his time.
Renowned American figure from the early 20th century, and there continue to be numerous schools of study devoted to psychism and dedicated to him.
Do you think he's been contacted?
Possibly yes. Possibly yes, because look, many of these seers are all contacted by what they develop, these clairvoyances. I think that contact triggers something in our brains or theirs to develop, because scientists say that psychic or visionary abilities might be possible for all of us, but not equally developed over 300 years. Are we all psychic and telepathic like the Asturians? Well, the Asturians are telepaths. They don't talk to you. They use telepathy and almost communicated with the bar this way. Well, then, I believe Edgar Cayce was a contactee, no doubt in my mind. As I said, the most famous contact we know, though he'll never admit it, is Steven Spiel. He's the contactee to me.
Manuel, you took an unexpected path. Tell me what makes you think he's watching?
The movies, he made Close Encounters of the Third Kind. This one reveals a reality to film that blurs the line between real and imaginary. Then comes E.T., the alien that gets lost, creating this for you. That exploration. Then he released a great series. I don't remember now the title. It's about 20 years old, in which he starts with the Roswell accident and one of these 7, 8 aliens escapes, because it has always been said that one of them managed to survive and escape. This one gets away, enters into a human body, and starts living on Earth, forming relationships and searching for, that is to say, for me, those ideas he comes up with, he is a contactee and has come to share this with us. And he is telling us in a gentle, light-hearted manner. We do not become frightened. And he is highlighting the positive side of these beings. You will never hear him discussing the negative aspects, like when we were talking earlier, of the War of the Worlds. They are back. They come to destroy Earth and staying in the speed. They are invading us. They are coming and invading us. And well, it presents another vision. And of course, we observe that vision from the perspective of the sapiens. That is to say, because if the sapiens were to arrive anywhere, we have always been natural predators. We reach a planet and realize we must take it. You'll see how long it takes us to arrive.
I believe that if there is any function that the human being has on Earth, I believe that throughout history, it has been to prey on this planet and to prey on other species. And I believe that once I was telling you that the purpose of these entities is also to feed on us, mainly from our energy and the type of energy that we emanate. There are those who feed on the energy of love. I believe there are those who feed on the energy of conflicts from what it is. I'm not sure if you have heard about what I mentioned to you the other time regarding the word archon. This word originates from the Greeks and means regent. They believe that these were the entities that sustained themselves and so forth. As you know, humanity has been engaged in wars and conflicts for countless years. Take your book, for instance, The War of the Gods. Which serves as a very clear illustration of this ongoing struggle. Could you explain why you chose the title The War of the Gods for your book?
Well, because I still hold the belief that we are living in a war between gods, between energies, or whatever you might call it. that is controlling the world. Indeed, I believe we are experiencing a conflict between these forces, whether you see them as gods, energies, or any other power that is ruling the world. And they use us as their soldiers to drain our energy, needing blood, as you mentioned, by accelerating us, putting us in wars, and enslaving others. This has been the case throughout history. Now it's more civilized with a different kind of slavery, but historically, as we've discussed in some program, Julius Caesar arrives to conquer Gaul, and he ultimately conquers Gaul. The Gaul had 3 million people. 1 million were killed, another million were enslaved for Rome, and the last million remained to work and pay tribute to Rome. The Sapiens, as mentioned in Harari's book, is the most predatory creature ever on Earth. So I consider the theory that maybe these beings altering our DNA are predators too, not as benevolent as portrayed in E.T. Similarly, we are his servants, and he's with us.
Well, let me share an example from the Bible in my research. We all know the story of Cain and Abel, where Yahweh asked for a burnt offering. Consider the origin of the term burnt offering. Why does one kill the other? One offers Yahweh plants and presents herbs, but Yahweh wasn't pleased. This was exactly the situation with Cain. It turns out that Abel approaches him and offers him the entrails along with all those types of elements, making it pleasing to Yahweh. For me, it brings about the third Holocaust, which is where the fervor of Cain and Abel on the subject originates, and that is the reason why Cain ends up killing him. Abel's death remains as an offering. After Cain repents, he escapes, and that is where the entire part of the story unfolds. Interestingly, when you examine the entire biblical narrative, Yahweh requests the offering, and in this case you see that the Sanhedrin, you see the part of the priests. In that temple where constantly the sacrifice of the blood is requested, curiously after some time, is where the part where God has given his son as a sacrifice comes, and it is where Christ comes, which is the other part of the story, as if to reverse what God asks. But now he is the one who gives him as a sacrifice. Where I also believe that this story was transformed. And that is the reason why in the Eucharist itself, when it says to drink and eat of my body, Christ is referring to my energy, to my blood. It is where, for instance, Christians say, by the blood of Christ, I cleanse you of your sins. However, it is a symbolic blood, yet it represents a real blood that was consumed at the time. Currently, if you go to specific parts of certain countries, particularly in the Arab African regions, they still continue to offer the sheep and the ram. What we know today as the Lamb of God, which is Jesus Christ, who is called this way, is a typology, a symbolism of what is the offering that was made, because for many years oxen were offered and a great number of animals were offered. The level of all of that. And the origin comes from the part of Abel and Cain, and that is where the part of the blood comes in today. Today we see that, for example, within the context we are talking about, there is a context where these entities manifest themselves and prey on human beings or other species. As in the case of the chupacabra, which comes for the blood of cats, of dogs, but especially of sheep and chickens. And it is where we have seen that there was a phenomenon that fell into the urban myth and popular folklore, where we found many evidences of animals that have been strangely depredated, where there was no violence. It was found that they had a kind of orifice where their fluids were taken out. It has also been found that many cows that in certain parts are attached to this type of phenomena, where it is thought that these beings or entities come from some biological characteristics of the bodies of these animals. So this is connects with your topic. I would ask, what is the reason behind the gods or What is the cause of their conflict?
Right? It's all about power. Some gods being more important than others, and they involve us. When discussing blood, to me, the clearest thing is the continuous wars throughout history and the executions of prisoners, which are very typical, that have executed them. Then it becomes a way to pay the gods with blood because there are gods who need blood. That is why, as you mentioned, the sacrifice of the lamb always requires blood. It is like a source of energy and nourishment for the gods. This is because when we discuss gods, well, we simplified it to a good God. For Christians, it is Jehovah or Christ, as you prefer, and an evil God, the devil, who causes all the world's evil. So, well, I think there are far more gods out there. Perhaps there are some on the side of what we could truly love, good gods, and then there are other gods that demand our blood and sacrifices because it propels us forward. Why do you end up with a Genghis Khan? Why do you end up with a Hitler? Why do you end up with a Stalin? Well, they emerge to draw blood that they give us. It's pure, absolutely pure. They require blood to survive. Then, well, the idea that all of this is connected to extraterrestrials. Well, yes, but once more, I repeat, do the extraterrestrials come from another planet or are they here among us, having always been here? Like when we discussed the beginnings, when the astronaut gods arrived, on Earth at that time, the Homo erectus was present. So as studies show, he was a violent being. Man would kill for food, and sometimes it seemed like they could fight each other, but they weren't violent in that way. Slavery wasn't a concept then, and that's because they didn't understand why none of them would hit a stick against the water. In other words, they didn't engage in work. They were almost like animals. Then, when these species were modified, leading to the emergence of Homo sapiens, they evolved into beings that were predators of the sea. But why did this happen? Because it holds the energy of these gods or beings we call extraterrestrials might actually be here. Well, nobody will find an answer to that. I mean, I doubt it, unless we discover something and some of these beings reach out to us and we truly understand their intent.
And what do you think now that, for example, just as we were talking about that first began the literature, the chronicles, maybe fiction, and maybe some real ones like the War of the Worlds, then came the radio program, then came the movies, then Hollywood has become perhaps the first promoter of all this alien industry. Now comes the internet, and now we find that on YouTube, you see all the cases of reports and all that, some very interesting, very serious, and that is where I believe that the phenomenon of the study of the UFO phenomenon, researchers differentiates between who is an enthusiast, who is someone who is passionate about all this, and then gives everything a certainty without investigating it, and there is someone who begins to differentiate and classify a little bit what it is and what it is not, and understand that yes, it is not. But with one thing that is real, we are already talking about the fact that will change the history of mankind. Once, while talking with Don Mario D'Agostino, a good friend of ours, he told me something very interesting once when I invited him to a television program. He said that we are facing the most important fact in history, the history of humanity, which is if we understand and we can prove that human being is and has been created by extraterrestrials or has had contact, or we are facing the moment of a massive contact with another type of beings, we will be changing the history of humanity. And indeed, it's true, because the very first thing we need to begin with to grasp all of this is the premise, and I am not sure if you recall, that we've always been told that we are alone in the universe, that the human being is walking on this planet, and that there is absolutely nothing beyond the borders of our planet. And then, all of a sudden, these stories emerge and appear, just like in the case of what I was telling you about Bernie and Betty Hill, who are involved in this fascinating case of a couple that were reportedly abducted. And there is this psychiatrist who performs a detailed analysis on them, Dr. Simon. Interestingly, he begins to assign them names and surnames, suggesting that they originate from a place known as Zeta Reticularis, which is located within the Orion constellation. That's when we begin to name the aliens, giving them first and last names. We already call them reptilians, greys, from Lyra, classifying them from different places. This leads to the title of a fascinating book I found once, which states the author is American. The Extraterrestrials, Our Ancestors, the Extraterrestrials. And that is where the part of what we are not a human being, that as Charles Darwin, evolutionist, told us the story that is by natural selection, that we come from the process that hominids encountered the situation, that they had to adapt to the changes of nature. And that adaptation led them to an evolution. And we are the result of this. The most crucial aspect is the extensive manipulation that has occurred both at a biological and genetic level, as well as mixing at various other levels of characteristics, just like the terrestrial ones, resulting in who we are today. I once mentioned the case of the Paracas skulls located in Paracas, where you can observe the elongation and notice that they possess non-human traits that exceed what is merely skull manipulation from childhood. It has been discovered that they were naturally born that way and they remain like that. In Mexico, we are studying a significant skull from Sonora that appears non-human, possibly extraterrestrial. It's an extraordinary phenomenon. The question is, what catches my attention most today? Have you seen that governments have already declassified, expressed videos and technology so extraordinary that they were already aware of it? How much they are or have been among us since always, and we have just come to discover it.
Well, I believe that yes, as we were talking about before, that they have always been among us. They have always had leadership and a power much greater than ours. But to me, all this description, classification, and all this, I have my theory about this, is in my book. Well, look, first, we must seek greater control over humanity. As I mentioned in my book, there is a group that governs it, which could include many individuals. Eventually, the people experienced 9/11, which stripped away our freedoms and led us to surrender them. The COVID situation emerged, keeping us confined for a year, testing our limits of endurance. There will come a time when they'll need something new to establish a world government and follow all the premises. That will be the fear of an extraterrestrial invasion. Major governments will use this fear, spreading it, and automatically people will panic with total fear of extraterrestrials coming, so to speak.
Are you saying that is actually planning a real, virtual, or apparent invasion?
Well, that would be, well, like everything else, if it tells you that there is fear of terrorists, it may be real or it may be a lie. Yes, there have been many attacks since September 11th, but the measures taken suggest that's what has prevented further incidents. COVID-19 came, COVID-22 will come, and COVID-23 will emerge when it wants. They'll say measures are already in place. If they claim a real or imaginary extraterrestrial invasion is impending and measures are needed, humanity will accept it and the rules they impose. I believe that the fact that they are declassifying such a large amount of information that they used to keep it secret, because eventually it is to tell you, look, these people is planning an invasion. There is a book, a trilogy of novels of a Chinese author who is fantastic. I do not remember the last name because it is a Chinese of these that no one can pronounce. But the book is called The Enigma of the Three Bodies. It is a book that was particularly a significant success in Europe. And the story begins, the novel commences in China during the era of Mao's Cultural Revolution. The characters are progressing through these events. Then there are certain scientists who come to the realization that they have discovered something important through signals being sent, that an invasion of Earth is being planned from a planet I can't recall, mega something. The Chinese government contacts Europe, investigations begin, and they find out these people claim peace but want Earth to surrender yet. The journey takes 300 years. From their galaxy, it takes 300 years to travel. Then time passes. And you reach the years 2014 to 2015. You begin intercepting calls from these supposed extraterrestrials. They observe the evolution of humans so rapidly that it has. And then the point is that if these people keep advancing at this pace, by the time we reach 250 years into the future, they will possess a scientific and technological capacity far superior to what we currently have here. Not necessarily superior to what we have on our entire planet, but certainly the difference will be 300 years of progress. And it is not the same 300 years of progress as 2,000 years ago, when these people did not advance at all compared. 300 years now, when every single year they make a significant qualitative leap in some area, ultimately the mission becomes forgotten. 3 books, quite fascinating overall. That's where I make my point. These people, or they're here, or they're quite nearby, because if they need to travel from what is the nearest star we have, I believe it's Alpha Centauri, which is about 4 million years away. Imagine a journey of 4,000,000 years.
By using our technology and the methods we have to reach that point, they might possess a different dynamic, and now we observe it with the advent of new technology like wormholes. This innovation allows travel at speeds exceeding the speed of light, making that vast distance essentially become one.
Possible, but we can only rely on what we know now, which is the speed of light, the fastest we believe. So when say it's 4 million light years away, what does that mean to you? It means that any star you see at night is 4 million years distant. That is, we are observing events from 4 million years ago. And we don't know if that star still exists. One thing that's sometimes hard to grasp is that a star you see at night is 4 million light years from P. And that is precisely what we are observing, because we are uncertain if that actually exists today. Therefore, I lean more towards the belief that these extraterrestrials, these species, are indeed here among us. And so among us, they have evolved in numerous instances. Well, yes, you may recognize them as Greys, vegans, or Asturians, but in reality, they have integrated into our system by becoming a part of us, and they themselves have their own distinct groups. We mentioned Jews and some Indian tribes in Mexico that don't mix, as they're similar. And others, like when we see Greys or reptilians, are here, but in another world. They exist in a universe parallel to ours, so they seldom relate to us. They follow their own path, their own form, by being among us. Who are they? What are they? Are they real? Do they exist or not? This question is debated, but logically it seems more sensible to me. If they exist, they are among us rather than arriving from a distant planet.
Well, the fact is they are present, they are indeed there because you can see the evidence and it's quite clear where you can locate them. I am able to tell you about what I've had the chance to investigate and also meet with researchers who possess irrefutable evidence. For example, curiously in Mexico, there is a phenomenon that is appearing around volcanoes. In the case of Popocatépetl, in the case of Volcán de Fuego, there in Colima, you can go to different areas, the area Silencio in the north of Mexico. It's where one of the rockets fell when the space era began to what causes this attraction phenomenon to happen. Right here in Miami, in front of us, you live near the Bermuda Triangle, famous for its mysteries, similar to Asia's Triangle of Death. We see different places. In Mongolia, there is the famous Shambhala, known as a dimensional portal. Various cultures have these places, known for extraordinary presences of ships and objects. Well, I can tell you that in Mexico, there are cameras installed by the government that monitor volcanoes both day and night. During eruptions or while they are happening, you can see all sorts of objects and ships. There's an extraordinary case that happened not long ago, where it was discovered that the same ship appeared in two different locations at both the Popocatépetl and the Colima volcano. Interestingly, Alfonso Salazar, along with the researcher Rocio Reyes, discovered certain kinds of anomalies. They shared these findings with one of the most renowned expositors, Jaime Maussan, on Tercer Milenio, who is a prominent figure among UFO phenomenon divulgators. I had the opportunity to analyze a collection of photographs and videos. In these, you can observe a bird flying by, and as it flies, it ejects spheres. These spheres appear to freeze momentarily, then start to vanish in an unusual manner. You're discovering that ufological evidence extends beyond the flying saucer we discussed. It surpasses the descriptions they give us about certain characteristics. I identified this type of, which I named the mother bird, specifically in India. In ancient cultures, like in the Upanishads, in the Rig Vedas, there's mention of aliens or gods being transported in these kinds of birds. And then we come to realize that throughout the history of mankind, there exists a collection of stories, chronicles, and various pieces of evidence, which in fact they refer to as gods.